If you're not late swapping your MLB DFS lineups, you are leaving money on the table. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not NBA DFS where you need to late swap a half a dozen times every night, every single time a game starts. But late swapping is still a big part of baseball DFS. Not only does a late scratch and taking a zero completely sink your lineups, but we get valuable information as new starting lineups come out and as games in progress play out that are important to take advantage of. In my last strategy guide, you learned the right mindset to have a successful 2025 season of MLB DFS, how to select a strong contest portfolio for each slate you play, and how to build your lineups. In this video, I'll walk through exactly how and when to late swap your MLB DFS lineups. I'm Jordan Chand, SaberSim's head coach. Let's go ahead and dive in. Now first, information is half the battle when it comes to late swap, knowing when news has broken that you need to react to. And SaberSim's notifications make that easy. We'll send you a notification if you have a player that is out in your entries file that you've loaded onto SaberSim. You can see those notifications in the notification center in the upper right with this bell icon. And you can see all these past notifications that have shown up here, mostly from my original dummy lineups that I put in to start the slate. These notifications are on by default, but you can open up your settings menu just to see how this all works here. You'll see I'm getting notifications to my computer if I have a player that is out or has a zero projection in my entries file. You can also turn on additional notifications if you want to. That will send you another notification if a player's projection has dropped by a certain percentage. And then this final notification here just sends you a ping if you're working on SaberSim and the projections have updated at all. But these notifications will happen automatically on your computer as long as you have SaberSim up. And if you want to turn notifications on to your phone, you can do that as well. I'm not going to do a full tutorial on how to set that up because we already have one. If you click this link here at the bottom of this settings menu, you'll see a tutorial walking through how to get that set up if you want those phone notifications. But this is a huge part of the puzzle here, is just making sure you are aware of when these swaps need to happen. The other thing to do on the information side is be aware of what starting lineups are still to come. So when you build that lock, and actually when you are doing late swaps throughout the slate, you should take stock of the teams that don't yet have a confirmed starting lineup and when those games start. You can see this easily with the games panel at the top here. Any team that does not have a green check mark next to it means that we don't yet have a confirmed starting lineup for that team. And these are the teams that most likely are going to be the ones that cause you to need to late swap because the starting lineup that comes out is different than what we expected. Now, I personally like to set alarms if there's a game start window that I know I particularly need to be aware of. Maybe it's the 7:40 game start window where there's a few teams that haven't started that don't have confirmed starting lineups out when I'm building at lock. Now, of course, some of you may already have realized here that tonight we don't have any teams that don't yet have a confirmed starting lineup out. In fact, all of the confirmed starting lineups were out at lock. But that will change as the season progresses here. This is only the second night of baseball. This early in the season, a lot of times the teams know what their early starting lineups are going to be. As the season progresses, as guys get injured, just as we get into the summer, there are going to be plenty of slates where you don't have confirmed starting lineups for every team at lock. And in fact, there are probably going to be quite a few slates where there are a lot of teams that don't have confirmed starting lineups, or daytime slates on the weekend that span 5 or 6 hours. There are going to be plenty of teams where we'll be getting these starting lineups throughout the slate. And don't worry, I am still going to walk through what the process would look like if this was a slate that we needed to do a late swap because there was some starting lineup or a scratch or something like that that came out different than expected. But first, let's talk about some big picture late swap principles here. The first one is to keep your late swap process simple. Late swap really, once you get the hang of it, should only take a few minutes, and you shouldn't feel the need to be making a bunch of changes or dramatically shifting what you were doing before lock when you're doing late swaps, especially for something like baseball. So when you sit down to actually do your late swaps, you always want to quick swap first, and that is done with the lightning bolt here in the upper left. If this is red, it means that you have players in your entries file on SaberSim that have since been ruled out. This would have likely come with a notification as well, letting you know that that player is out. So if we click this here, we can see I am making this up here just for the purposes of demonstration, but in this case, that Mookie Betts is apparently out in 8 of my lineups here. Now, even if you have plenty of time, you should always be doing a quick swap first. You never know what might happen, and don't leave it to chance if you get the actual late swap done in time. Just click the red lightning bolt and go through this quick swap process. What I typically do with my quick swaps here is a little bit different depending on if I'm talking about a hitter or a pitcher that has been scratched or is not in the lineup. More often than not, it's going to be hitters, but occasionally there will be pitchers that show up here as well. For hitters, what I like to do is swap to the best available from the same team first to get as many of that player that is in the lineup into a player from the same team to keep stacks intact. So what actually happens if I do this here and click apply is that Mookie Betts is going to be replaced by a Dodger, the best projected Dodger that fits into that particular spot on the lineup based on salary, positional things, everything like that, where possible. So in this case, one of these Mookie Betts lineups was able to swap to Teoscar Hernandez. Then from here, I want to swap all the remaining Mookie Betts teams with just the best available hitter. I just want somebody to occupy that spot, so I can do another one here. And in this case, I get some Lindor and some Corey Seager. Then once that process is complete here, you can just download the new entries file that has removed the player that is out and then re-upload that into DraftKings. Now, in the event that it is a pitcher that has gotten scratched, let's say, for example, Luis Castillo gets a very late scratch, hurts himself warming up or something like that, you're going to be best served just swapping to the best available player. There's no reason to swap necessarily to whoever replaces him on that team. So we would just do a swap and we get all of these different pitchers depending on how much salary was available in that lineup. And we could download those entries here and re-upload those as well to DraftKings. Now, I want to reinforce that you should always do a quick swap first. Again, you never know what's going to happen. I've seen players that are even extremely experienced doing late swaps have the process down pat that end up having a process that takes a little bit longer that night, or maybe your browser crashes or something like that. Don't leave it up to chance. Just do the quick swap first. Get those players that are not playing out of your lineups. And then you can proceed with the late swap, where the general process is going to be the same as it is before lock, and we are going to do build, review, revise. So you initiate a late swap with this late swap button at the top of the screen here. And in general, I recommend using the default settings to do late swaps, which is exactly what will happen if you just click this late swap button. However, before doing that, I do want to call out that if you want to preserve any exposures that you set before lock or lineup rules or any custom projections or things like that, you can pull those settings from your old build into the late swap. That is done with this gear icon that pulls up your late swap settings, and then this down here labeled settings. So you'll see this is set to default by default, which is going to mean that you're using the base SaberSim settings. You can change this. So the build I ran before lock is this build 2 build. And if I set it to that, we're going to pull in any exposures, things like that, that I had from this build. But doing build, review, revise with the default SaberSim settings is going to be the best approach when you're running late swaps for the same reason that it is before lock. It is hard to know how the changing information affects the slate as a whole. And by swapping, bringing in the takes that you had before lock in the form of all your exposures you may have set, those are now based on old information. And you are robbing yourself of the opportunity of seeing new angles that may have opened up. Maybe there's a team now that is actually a great stack because the star opposing pitcher got scratched and now the team's going to do a bullpen game. Or there is a min price guy that was expected to bat ninth that's now batting leadoff in a game that has a decent team total, and it makes that entire team stackable. In general, let the sims cook with late swap, at least when you first run it. You'll have the opportunity to make adjustments after, and it's always hard to know how information changing affects the optimal strategy for the slate. So let's actually get a late swap going here. All you need to do is click the late swap button. After your swaps are built, if you are on the SaberSim Ultimate plan, your contest sims will kick off. Now in late swap, your contest sims are taking into account what has already happened in the games that have already started and the real actual lineups you're competing against in your contests. So at the time I'm running this build here, we've got 2 games that are probably a decent way in here, and we have information about how those games are progressing that we didn't have at lock. The contest sims for lineups that contain Orioles, Blue Jays, Pirates, and Marlins now are appropriately accounting for however many fantasy points the players in those games have already scored. We also know the actual ownerships of those players and what lineups in your contest that contain those players are starting to look like. The contest sims that you're running for your late swap builds are accounting for that information. They have information they didn't have at lock. Now, this is extremely valuable and it makes contest sims get increasingly accurate as the slate is playing out. There's not really anything else on the market like this. And if you want to take advantage of the contest sims this season, especially for late swap, we have reset everyone's trial here at SaberSim. So you can get a free 5-day trial to SaberSim Ultimate to kick the year off and give these contest sims a shot. Even if you've tried Ultimate before and you didn't really like it, this was reset for everyone. So come give SaberSim Ultimate a try for the first 5 days of the season. Now, once your contest sim's complete, or if you're not on Ultimate just after your swaps have finished building, I recommend getting a file uploaded into the site. Even if you have extra time, we'll have a second to come back here in a minute and review and take a look and see what our exposures and see what will have changed, but you should get a file uploaded here. The quick swaps that we did helped us avoid taking a 0 anywhere, but these swaps based on that new information are going to be better than quick swaps, taking advantage of the updated starting lineups and rebuilding lineups. So we should get them uploaded. So to do that, you just follow the green button here. So first thing we're going to do is click apply. And then from there, we click save to contest to get these swaps entered into our entries file. And after we get to the green positive success message, we are ready to download a new entries file and we can upload that to the site. Now, I do quickly want to step through this process on FanDuel as well. It is very similar, but the actual steps on the FanDuel site are slightly different for late swap. So let's get a late swap going here. First, we'll just click the late swap button. Then once your swaps have been built and your contest sims have run, if necessary, you can click the apply button and then click the save to contest button to get that into your entries file. And once you get the positive success message, you can click the download entries button in the upper left. From there, that's going to take you to the live page on FanDuel, slightly different than the upcoming page that you use before lock. And then you can click the CSV edit. You want to just specify what slate this is for. In this case, this is the baseball slate. And then you can browse and find the entries file you just downloaded from SaberSim, and then click the edit button to send that to FanDuel. Once you have a late swap uploaded to the site, you now have an opportunity to review your swaps, apply any new takes that you have, or just overall see how things are looking. You should be aware of how much time you have before the next game locks as you're doing this, especially if you're making changes. And note that as you are potentially making changes, that the changing information, the changing simulations because of starting lineups that have come out, late scratches, or changing information based on how your lineups are performing in their contests can sometimes dramatically change your exposures. So you should be aware that takes that you had before lock may not be the most profitable way to swap your lineups now, even if nothing has apparently changed about that game in particular. In other words, let's say I knew that I really wanted to be heavy on the Cubs before lock, for example, and the simulations, the SaberSim sims, were also in agreement on that take. I was getting a lot of Cubs exposure. And then we have some change to the Dodgers lineup, and now suddenly I'm getting a lot of Dodgers exposure. I should at least take a moment and pause and think about that before I continue to jam in Cubs. It's possible that either because of the way that my lineups are performing in their contests or some salary thing based on the way that the Dodgers lineup has changed, that the Cubs are no longer as good of a play as they were, even though their starting lineup and their implied team total is exactly the same as it was. I do want to call out a couple important settings here. First is the group by contest toggle. You'll see that the way that I'm looking at my lineups right now are very similar to how they look before lock. I'm seeing the actual lineups themselves here. If you want to look at your lineups in the form of what contest they belong to, you can instead group them by contest with this toggle. Vice versa, if you run your late swap build and you see this screen and you're thinking, why am I just seeing all the contests I'm playing? Where are my lineups? Then you'll want to turn that toggle off and you'll see the lineups this way. Similarly, we have two different ways to view your lineups. We have a default and compact view here, depending on just how much information you want to see on the screen at once and how big or small you want it to look. So you do have the option to toggle between detailed and compact mode there. The process for reviewing and revising is the same as it is before lock. You should think about this from macro to micro, the widest scale of thinking about a lineup to the smallest scale of thinking about a lineup, which is stack exposures first, your stack types, then your team stacks, and then your individual player exposures. So you can review your exposures that you got in your swap here, looking at the stack types you are getting first, then progress to team stacks and players. I think one of the more interesting things to look at here is your delta exposure, which will show you how much you've changed based on what you had before lock. So you can see in this case, I actually am just coming down a little bit on some of these large stacks because I ended up getting pushed into a little bit smaller stacks. Team stacks can be very interesting for this reason as well. You can see it looks like based on how lineups were performing and just the actual ownership of players in my contest here, that I slightly came off of the Diamondbacks and slightly came onto the Dodgers and Seattle to some extent here in this late swap. Just like you do before lock, you can make adjustments to the min and max exposures here using those particular columns, whether you are making adjustments to individual player exposures, to stack exposures, or to team stacks. You can also uncheck or lock in any of those as needed. Now, I will say, as you are late swapping, and some advice I would give you, I would do the best you can to become less opinionated about the slate. If you have takes that you want to maintain throughout the entire slate, so be it. That's perfectly fine. But again, the system of the DFS slate is getting more and more complicated as the slate is playing out, but the contest sims are getting more and more information to sift through it all. I have 144 unique lineups on DraftKings tonight. They are all played into a variety of different contests here, and every single lineup I am playing currently has a different performance. Some of its players might be doing well, some of its players might not be doing well. The exposures that you see here on the screen are a summary of all of the different lineups that you are playing, but one lineup might be getting swapped onto a very contrarian stack because the first few players in the early game that it used are doing really poorly. Maybe another lineup is shifting its salary allocation and using some more expensive pitchers because it had room to put in a low projected guy that's now batting leadoff. There's all these different things going on when you're late swapping, and it's very hard to capture all of that information if you're just looking at it and saying, well, I know I wanted 30% Baltimore and I'm not getting that anymore. Now, don't let me stop you if you really want 30% Baltimore. Put it in there. SaberSim will get it for you. You upload that file. But I do want to emphasize that you should pause when you're running your late swaps, especially as the slate progresses. And if you are putting in your takes in the form of exposure adjustments and changes and things like that, you should be more confident about them if you're making adjustments when late swap compared to before lock even happens. Now, if you have made any adjustments, changed any exposures, things like that, the last step would be to do one final save. So here, I'll show you what that will look like. We'll just eliminate a stack type that I don't want to play here. And you'll do one final process of clicking apply and letting SaberSim apply your custom exposures. And when that process is complete, one final save to actually save that entries file. And once you get your positive success message, then you are good to download that entries file and upload it back to the site that you're playing on. Now, if this were a real late swap, you would also want to make a mental note of any teams that still have pending starting lineup, especially if this is an earlier start window. I want to make sure that I'm aware of any other late swaps that I need to check up on. And I do typically set an alarm on my phone for the different times that games are locking, just so I can take a quick glance at my notifications and see if anything has changed. As long as you're paying attention to those alerts and keeping in mind what swap windows are particularly important to you, you'll be prepared to react as the night progresses. That's all there is to it when it comes to late swap in MLB DFS. Let's quickly summarize everything we've gone through here today. First, be prepared for swaps. You want to make sure your notifications are on, and you want to know which teams still have starting lineups coming when you put your lineups in at lock. Your late swap process itself should be simple. Always, always, always quick swap first if that lightning bolt in the upper left of your screen is red. Then use the build, review, revise process for your late swap builds themselves. Give the sims an opportunity to cook. You never know how the changing information and how the slate is playing out affects the optimal strategy for every single lineup that you played at lock. After the build and the contest sims are complete, get an initial entries file uploaded to the site to make sure you're taking advantage of that information, and then use the same review revise process, reviewing your stack exposures, your team stacks, and your players to make sure you're still satisfied with your lineup portfolio. In the next video, I'll show what to do the next day after playing MLB DFS, breaking down how to use our contest flashback feature to review your play and learn from the top players. If you still have questions about the late swap process on SaberSim or any other part of MLB DFS strategy, make sure you're attending our office hours live streams hosted on our YouTube channel. You can also always ask questions in our Discord server or by emailing us at support@sabersim.com. In the meantime, thank you again so much for watching. Good luck this season, and I'll see you in the next video.